Welcome back to G Brews. Today I'm working on kegging the beer I'm going to start calling Back Country. It's a double IPA hazy, and the first thing that I want to do is install a floating dip tube in this keg. And if you look down there, you can see the tube that goes all the way down to the bottom. I've got some sanitizer in the bottom of it. I've got this adapter, the floating ball with the tube, and then the actual post right there. So first thing I'm gonna do this morning is work on flipping the keg over to this floating. First thing I need to do is, you can see right on the side there, let me see if I can get the light more. It says out. I'm gonna pull this post out, pull the tube out, and then go from there. All right, so I got this post loosened up. And I can just twist it off there. I don't want to lose that spring. Remember that. And then you can just pull the post that goes all the way down to the bottom right out. So you can see it's got a little bend in it, so it kind of goes all the way down to the bottom. The benefit of a floating dip tube is that because I'm homebrewing and I'm not able to get everything out of the 5-gallon pail that I'm fermenting in, this keeps the pickup for the beer up near the top of the beer, and that way it won't pick up any of the sedimentation on the very bottom. So hopefully you'll actually get more of the beer and less of the sediment to start with, but this is the first time I'm trying it, so we'll see. So I have the new post in there, and then not sure if you can really see it, but you can see there's the tube connected to the bottom of that post. And then I'm just going to take the spring, put the spring back on. I'm trying to do this with my left hand, so it's a little tricky. All right, and then you just twist that on. There we go. Now it's threaded on there. All right, and then I'll go ahead and tighten that down. I need to go through and fully sanitize this keg, so I'm going to do that after this. And then I have a wrench. And I'll tighten this down. I don't know how tight you're supposed to do that, but... All right, so that's a good first step. Now I need to attach the float to the end of the hose. All right, so I have the float on the end of the tube. I'm a little worried because this tube was kinked in the packaging, so I'm hoping that it will actually continue to flow. But I'm just going to drop that down in there, and I'm going to put the top back on. Again, doing this left-handed. And I gotta remember to let the pressure relief valve. So I've installed the floating dip tube. I'm gonna sanitize this keg, and then I will be back and I'll show you kegging backcountry. So it works. So this is the keg I just switched over. I just pressurized it to 10 PSI, and I just have this little tap handle that I use when I sanitize kegs. And you can see, if I do that, it's picking up the limited amount of fluid that's in this keg. So I'm gonna go ahead, finish sanitizing this keg, and then we'll be back to actually put some beer in it. I'm gonna do a quick walkthrough of how I fermented this beer. So I got these two freezers. I have an Inkbird temperature control, and then I have a little ceramic heat light inside. And both the freezer and the light are plugged in to the Inkbird. When it's turned on, you can see what the temperature is for the probe. And I put the probe on the side of the bucket there. You can see inside some bubble wrap, so it gets a closer temperature of the actual beer. And then I ordered one of these, I don't know exactly, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically a cold crash protector. Because when things cool off, they contract. So what I don't want to do is suck air into that bucket. You put this inflatable bag on there, and then you just have the other tube in some liquid. I put in some sanitizer, and it actually fills that bag up with CO2. And since CO2 is heavier than oxygen, it'll sit lower towards the bucket itself. And then as it sucks back in, it has a one-way valve on it. It'll suck the CO2 in instead of oxygen to go through and make sure that it stays as sterile of an environment as possible. So here's how I fill my kegs. I purged the keg with CO2. Since CO2 is heavier than air, I just have the hole that normally goes to the blow-off valve in there, because the CO2 will stay closer to the beer as oxygen flows in that hole. And then I just slowly do a gravity feed. And if you listen quietly, you can hear the beer actually going in. So this will probably take maybe 2, maybe 3 minutes to actually fill, and then we'll be back. One thing I just remembered is I actually meant to throw the keg in the freezer so the keg would be chilled to start with. Since this beer is actually cold crashed down to about 33 degrees, what my plan is to actually just throw the temperature gauge back in the freezer. I'm going to throw this keg right back in the freezer, and that way it'll chill it, and I'm just going to let it condition in the keg in the freezer for probably at least another week or so, and then I'll throw it in the kegerator. So you can see the beer slowly flowing in there, slowly filling up. So if you look really closely right there, that thing floating in the foam, that's the float for the dip tube. So far, it seems to be working. All right, so I'm trying something different here. I'm actually gonna force carbonate this beer. And by the way, I have no idea if I'm actually in frame or not, so hopefully I am and you can actually see, but this is more the focus. So I'm gonna hook up the CO2, make sure that the pressure relief valve isn't out. I'm gonna turn the CO2 on, and I'm gonna push it up to about 30 PSI. Wait for that to stabilize a little bit. It's going a little over 30. So I'll back it off just a little bit, just so it settles in right about 30. Okay, so we're sitting at about 30 PSI. And then what you do, you take the keg and you rock it back and forth 200 times. And I can actually hear the CO2 coming out of the CO2 tank right now. There's 50. There's 100. There's 100. The reason you shake it back and forth is you actually want to increase the surface area of the beer mixing around, so it pushes the CO2 into the beer from the pressure that's in the open space right here. I only filled it up to about here or so that way it would have a bunch of space for the CO2. So now I've got my keg of Back Country sitting in here. I'm going to go ahead, close this, and try to do this with one hand, which always proves to be interesting. Sit you down for a minute. All right, I'm back. Now you can see the thermometer is actually outside. So all I really need to do, I'm gonna come in the back over here, and I just want this to actually hang, not touching the keg, but just kind of hanging off the side there. So that way it can tell what the temperature of the air is. And then I just close the door, and you can see it's set at 33 degrees. It's dropping quite rapidly. See the green light on the freezer is on. I actually have it on the lowest setting possible. And then I will just let it sit there as a secondary fermentation. Well, I guess actually not secondary fermentation. This is more just kind of a conditioning step. I'll probably let it sit here for at least a week, maybe 2. And in the freezer next to me, I actually have a lager. It's got to ferment for about another week, and then I'm going to be going through the same steps. I'm going to be throwing that in a keg. That's what I'm calling right now. I'm calling it Bunny Hill. It's an American light lager. The ABV actually hit a little higher than I was targeting. I was targeting like 3.5 to 4, hit 4.5, so I got to adjust the recipe a little bit. And the Back Country that I just put in the keg, I only put 1 package of yeast in it. I think I actually needed 2. I couldn't get the final gravity as low as I wanted to. It actually settled out about 1024, which puts the alcohol percentage at just about, if I remember correctly, like 5.4. I was aiming for 7.2. Yeah, I've got some ideas for adjusting the yeast. And I'm not going to try to change too many variables. These recipes are actually getting really close, from my point of view, to being ready to kind of lock in. What I need to do is just get a couple final variables figured out, like the yeast rate and stuff like that. I did put 2 packages of beer in the lager that is fermenting right now, and that one dropped really quick. It started at about, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, about 1044, and right now it's hovering around 1007. I actually got one of the tilt hydrometers, so it's showing the temperature and the gravity. It samples every hour, and I can just look at a chart and I can go through and track it. So you can see it's dropped 10 degrees in that freezer already. So that is the second installment on Back Country. I'm going to try to link this. I don't remember if I actually recorded brewing this beer. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to do a 3-part series for each beer that I brew. First, brewing it. Second, kegging it, bottling it. I'm looking at a canning solution to make it easier. I'm not a big fan of bottling because it's just a pain in the butt to get the bottles back and clean them and everything like that. So I'm actually looking at getting the ability to do both kegs and cans. And then third, a taste review. So hope you all stay tuned, and don't forget, be kind. One last little bit of helpful information, hopefully. There's actually a carbonation chart. And if you go through, you can actually use the instructions on where you want to go through and have the volumes of CO2. So you can see for an ale, I want to be between 2.0 and 2.6. So if I take a look at the beer temperature, which is the closest I can go is 35, and I come across, I actually should be sitting roughly between a 5 and 6 PSI. I'll probably start there once I put it on my kegerator, but I do have a 15-foot line to try to help control some of the foam, so I might have to turn it up just a little bit to go from there, but that'll definitely be in the sampling video. So back to your regular day.